Hello everyone and welcome to this video about how to calculate average expenses. In this video, we'll talk about how you can calculate your average expenses by using data from your past expenses. We'll look at how to calculate different types of averages and which type of average might be more useful for you. So, if that sounds interesting, stay with me till the end of the video. At the end of the video, I've also added a section where I talk about something that has helped me save money a lot in my personal life. And it's all based on these two tools that I have here. These are my credit cards. Now I don't like to use credit cards because I don't want to go into debt. But I do use these two credit cards to get cash back on the things that I buy. So this one gives me 2% cash back on anything that I buy, and this one gives me 3% cash back on anything that I buy. Now I still pay off the full balance of these credit cards every single month. I don't carry a balance or any debt from one month to another. I just like getting that cash back immediately. So, when I buy something for $5, I get 10 cents or 15 cents back depending on which card I use. It really adds up over time. And actually, I'm going to show you some numbers at the end of the video about how much I've earned just using these two cards. So make sure you stay till the end to see those numbers. Okay, so let's say that we want to figure out our average monthly expenses. What does that mean? That means that we want to know how much money we spend typically each month. So, we need to calculate the average. There are many ways to calculate an average. One way is to calculate the arithmetic mean, and there is something else called the median, which is the middle value. I am not going to cover both of these in this video, but I leave links in the description below if you'd like to learn more about either one of them. In this video, we'll focus on the arithmetic mean. So, if you're interested in learning how to calculate the median, then click on one of those links below to check out another video. The arithmetic mean is probably what most people think of when they hear the word average. The arithmetic mean is calculated by adding all the values together and dividing by the number of values. So, if you want to calculate the arithmetic mean, then take the sum of all of your expenses and divide it by the number of months. For example, let's say that you spent $2,000 in January, $1,800 in February, $2,500 in March, $1,900 in April, and $2,200 in May. So, you've been tracking your expenses for 5 months. What is the arithmetic mean of your expenses? To calculate the arithmetic mean of your expenses, you would add 2,000 plus 1,800 plus 2,500 plus 1,900 plus 2,200 and then divide that sum by 5. So that's 11,400 divided by 5, which equals 2,280. So, your average monthly expense using the arithmetic mean is $2,280. Now notice that I said average monthly expense. So, if we look at our original list of expenses, we see that these are monthly expenses, but this average here is an average of those expenses. So, it's a little bit different than those expenses. This average tells us how much you would expect to spend in a given month. Notice that the average is somewhere between the highest expense and the lowest expense. The average is exactly in the middle. It is closer to the higher expenses than the lower expenses, and that is because the average takes into account all of your expenses. It doesn't just look at the highest expense or the lowest expense. Now, when you're recalculating your average, you might notice that it is different depending on how many months of data you include. Let us say instead of looking at 5 months of data, you only looked at 2 months of data. So, in this case, we take January and February, and we skip the rest of the months. So now we're looking at 2 months. So, what would the average be in this scenario? Well, if we take January, which was 2,000, and February, which was 1,800, and we add those together and then divide by 2, then we get 1,900. So that means that the average of your expenses over 2 months is $1,900. So notice that this average is lower than the average that we got before when we took all 5 months into consideration. And that makes sense because when you take more months into consideration, then you're retaking more data into consideration. So, you're looking at more of your expenses. So, it's going to be more accurate. So, basically, when you have more data or more months of data to work with, then you will have a more accurate idea of what your average is. So, how many months of data should you use to calculate your average? Well, the more the better, but generally speaking, if you have at least 3 months of data, then that's usually enough. If you have at least 3 months of data, then you can feel pretty confident about the average that you've come up with. Another way to look at your average expenses is to break them down into different categories. So, instead of looking at all of your expenses together, you can look at specific categories such as housing or food or transportation. So, let's say that you want to look at your average food expenses per month. So, let's say that in January you spent $300 on food. In February you spent $250 on food. In March you spent $350 on food. In April, you spent $320 on food, and in May, you spent $280 on food. So again, we have 5 months of data. So, how do we calculate the average food expenses per month? Well, in this case, we're going to add up all of our food expenses and then divide by the number of months. So that means that we take 300, 250, 350, 320, 280, and then we divide that sum by 5. So 1500 divided by 5 equals 300. So your average food expense per month is $300. Now notice that this average is less than the average that we calculated earlier, which was the average of all of your expenses. So the average of all of your expenses was $2,280 and your average food expense was $300. And that makes sense, because food is probably not your biggest expense, right? So, your average food expense is going to be less than your average expense across all categories. One thing to keep in mind when you're recalculating your average expenses is that you need to make sure that you're recomparing apples to apples. Alright, so let's recap what we've learned. First, we learned how to calculate average expenses. And remember that there's different ways to calculate average, but in this video, we focused on the arithmetic mean. Second, we learned that when you have more data or more months of data, then you will have a more accurate idea of what your average is. And generally speaking, if you have at least 3 months of data, then that's usually enough. And third, we learned that when you're calculating your average expenses, you need to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. Alright, so let's jump into the bonus section. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I want to share with you how I've been able to save money using these 2 credit cards. So I've been using these credit cards for almost a year now, and in that time, I've earned 16% cash back on everything that I've bought. So basically, I've earned 16% of my total spending back in cash. And that's really helped me save a lot of money. So let me show you the numbers. So, if I go here, you can see that in the last 12 months, I've spent $17,600. And if I multiply that number by 0.16, you can see that I've earned $2,800 in cash back. And that's really helped me save a lot of money. Alright. Well, thank you for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please hit the like button. It really helps me out. Also, if you're not subscribed yet, please subscribe. I post new videos every week about personal finance and investing. So, if that sounds interesting, then please join me. Alright. Well, thank you again for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye.